It was a quiet evening, just like any other. I was curled up on the couch with a blanket, flipping through channels without really watching anything. The soft hum of the TV filled the room, and for the first time that week, I felt I could finally relax. The house was still, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary, until I heard the door creak open. At first, I thought it was my husband or maybe a friend stopping by, but when I turned my head, I saw him. It was Ryan, a colleague of my husband's. I'd seen him countless times at work functions and gatherings, but tonight something felt different. The way he looked at me carried a weight I couldn't name, and the air seemed heavier somehow. He stepped inside with a casual confidence, as though he already knew how this moment would unfold. I greeted him with a smile, asking if he was looking for my husband. He said no, he was just in the area and decided to stop by. Then he sat down beside me, a little closer than I expected. My heart began to race, not out of fear, but out of a strange, unsettled curiosity. We spoke in short exchanges, but every glance seemed to last too long. Every pause between words felt like it meant more than it should. I told myself I was imagining things, but part of me knew there was something unspoken happening. It was the kind of pull you can't explain, the quiet whisper of something you know you shouldn't want. Then, in a low voice, he said something I'll never forget. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it hit me like a wave. I tried to laugh it off, pretending it was a harmless joke, yet deep inside I knew it wasn't. His eyes told me he meant every word. He leaned back as though nothing unusual had happened, leaving me to sit there with the echo of his voice in my head. It was late, and my husband was still out having dinner with an old friend. I glanced at the clock, realizing we had at least an hour before he'd return. I shouldn't have been sitting there alone with Ryan, yet I didn't move. Our talk shifted from casual to personal, and he asked if I was truly happy. It was such a simple question, but it caught me off guard. He listened closely, making me feel as though my words mattered. I began to say more than I'd planned, admitting that things between me and my husband hadn't felt right for a long time. Something about that night changed the way I saw him, and myself. And I knew, deep down, this was only the beginning. Life with my husband had become a routine: wake up, work, dinner, sleep, repeat. The love was still there, but it had grown quiet, more like habit than passion. I never told anyone about the emptiness I sometimes felt, but sitting beside Ryan, it was as if someone was finally asking the questions I'd buried for years. Even then, I reminded myself of the line I couldn't cross. I was married, I had made vows, whatever was happening here had to stay within limits. But the harder I tried to hold onto that boundary, the more it began to blur. His gaze would meet mine and linger just a little too long. His words, though careful, carried a quiet undertone that made my heart beat faster. He wasn't pushing anything, but he wasn't hiding it either. When I asked again why he had come by, he gave a vague smile and said he thought I might need company. It wasn't a real answer, yet it made sense in a way I couldn't explain. The strangest part was that I didn't ask him to leave. Truthfully, I didn't want him to. Outside, the night deepened, and soft rain tapped against the windows. The air inside felt heavier, as if the unsaid things between us were pressing in. I glanced at Ryan and found him already watching me. The pause between us stretched until I realized something unspoken had already happened, something we couldn't take back. I tried focusing on the TV, but none of it registered. My thoughts kept circling back to him, to what had been said and what hadn't. The room felt too quiet. Ryan noticed my unease and asked softly if I was okay. I nodded, but it wasn't true. I was confused, torn between what I knew was right and the pull I felt toward him. It wasn't attraction in the usual sense, it felt deeper, more emotional than physical, and somehow that made it even more dangerous. I shifted the conversation to safer ground, asking about his work and relationships. He admitted he hadn't been serious with anyone in a while, then looked down before adding that sometimes it's hard to open up, until you meet the one person who makes it easy. His words caught in my chest. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt the same way. That was the part no one talks about, the quiet connection that feels both impossible and undeniable. It's never as simple as right or wrong. Sometimes it's the slow fading of something at home, and the sudden discovery of something unexpected with someone else. I loved my husband, he was kind, dependable, and had never given me a reason not to trust him. But somewhere along the way, we stopped truly seeing each other. Now, here was someone who looked at me in a way I hadn't felt in years. Thunder rumbled outside, breaking the silence. Ryan's expression shifted as his eyes met mine. It was as if he wanted to say more but was holding it back. Then he asked if I'd ever thought about how one night could change everything. I didn't answer, not because I didn't know, but because I did. He stood and moved toward the window, his back to me, giving me a brief moment to breathe. Still, the air between us felt heavy. I knew this wasn't over. My mind kept slipping toward the question I didn't want to ask myself: what if I stopped resisting and let this happen? Would it destroy everything, or had something already shifted that couldn't be undone? This was no longer just about attraction. It was about choices, about the moments we never planned for, but which end up shaping everything after. I didn't know if I should ask him to leave or let the night run its course. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the windows in a steady rhythm. The TV cast a soft, flickering glow, deepening the shadows and making the room feel smaller, more intimate. Ryan stood silently by the window, waiting. My heart was beating faster than it should have. The tension between us had become almost unbearable, heavy with everything we hadn't said and every feeling we had quietly hidden behind small talk and polite smiles. Ryan turned slowly from the window and walked back toward me, stopping just a few feet away. His eyes locked on mine as he spoke softly, telling me I didn't need to say anything, that he just needed to be there with me tonight. Something shifted deep inside me at his words, something I didn't want to name. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For so long, my marriage had been a place of safety and predictability. Now that safety felt distant, replaced by something that made me question everything I thought I knew. He hadn't touched me, hadn't crossed any physical line, yet I knew we were already far past where we should be emotionally. My hands trembled. I stood up, needing space, and walked toward the kitchen. He followed at a quiet pace, not demanding anything, just existing in the moment with me. Then, in a voice steady but weighted, he admitted he had felt this way for a while but had never planned on saying it. He acknowledged it was wrong, but said sometimes something feels right even when it shouldn't. His honesty hit me hard because it was the first time anyone had spoken aloud the very thing I had been battling inside. Leaning against the counter, my fingers gripped the edge as my thoughts spiraled. I didn't know whether to cry, shout, or run. But I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. A heavy silence filled the room, one that seemed desperate to be broken, until a knock sounded at the door. It was late, too late for visitors, and both of us froze. My heart raced as I wondered if it could be my husband, or someone else entirely. The knock came again, louder this time. Ryan looked at me, silently asking what to do. I motioned for him to stay quiet and stepped slowly toward the door. My hand hovered over the knob as every worst-case scenario flashed through my mind. If it was my husband, how would I explain Ryan's presence at this hour? When I finally opened the door, it wasn't him. It was my sister, soaked from the rain, her eyes wide with panic. She told me I needed to come with her immediately. It was about Mark, my husband. My throat went dry. I asked what happened, but she only glanced past me into the living room, her eyes catching on Ryan. She didn't say a word about him, only urged me to hurry. I looked back at Ryan, countless unspoken thoughts hanging between us, but there was no time to deal with them now. I have to go, I said quietly. Ryan nodded, but there was something different in his expression, concern, and a hint that he knew this night had taken a turn none of us were prepared for. In the car, my sister explained what had happened. Mark had been in an accident. It wasn't life-threatening, but serious enough to land him in the ER. He'd been driving home from dinner when another car ran a red light. In an instant, everything I thought I had time to figure out now felt urgent and fragile. Half an hour later, I sat by his hospital bed, watching him breathe. He was bruised, quiet, but alive. I held his hand, feeling its familiar weight, safe, yet strangely distant. The guilt settled heavy in my chest. While he'd been fighting for his life, I'd been sitting with someone else, tangled in emotions I didn't want to admit. The timing felt cruel, as if life had forced me to face a truth I had been avoiding. The next day, Ryan texted to ask if Mark was okay. I stared at his message before typing back, "Yes, he's resting. I'll talk to you soon." But even as I sent it, I knew that, soon, no longer had a clear meaning. Nothing did. When I returned home that night, I noticed Mark's phone on the kitchen counter, left behind in the rush to the hospital. I hadn't planned to check it, but something in me pushed me to. What I found sent a chill through me, a long string of late-night messages between him and a woman I didn't recognize. The tone, the timing, they were far from innocent. Flirty lines, suggestive comments, and intimate check-ins filled the screen. The contact was saved under a single letter, L. I didn't know anyone by that name. And the last message, sent just hours before the accident, stopped me cold. Can't wait to see you again. Tonight was perfect. My chest tightened. While I had been drowning in my own storm of guilt and confusion, Mark had already stepped outside our marriage. I told him quietly that I had to leave. He nodded, but his expression had changed. There was concern in his eyes, and something that made me think he knew the night had shifted into territory none of us expected. In the car, my sister explained that Mark had been in an accident. It wasn't life-threatening, but serious enough to put him in the ER. He had been driving home from dinner when another driver ran a red light. In that moment, everything I thought I had time to figure out suddenly felt urgent. Half an hour later, I was sitting beside his hospital bed, staring at his bruised and quiet face. Relief that he was alive mixed with a heavy weight of guilt pressing into my chest. I held his hand, feeling the familiar comfort of it, and yet realizing how distant it had become. I couldn't stop thinking about how I'd been emotionally involved with someone else while he was out there fighting for his life. The timing felt cruel, like life was forcing me to face a truth I'd been avoiding. The next day, Ryan sent me a message asking if Mark was okay. I told him Mark was resting and that we'd talk soon, though in my mind, soon, didn't feel certain anymore. When I got home that night, I noticed Mark's phone on the kitchen counter, left behind in the rush to the hospital. I wasn't planning to look at it, but curiosity pushed me to check. What I found froze me in place, a string of late-night messages between him and a woman I didn't know. The tone was intimate, the timing suspicious. One message read, "Can't wait to see you again. Tonight was perfect," sent just hours before his accident. In that moment, my own guilt collided with the realization that he had already stepped out of our marriage. I sat down, trying to make sense of how long this had been going on and why he never said anything. We had been distant, yes, but this felt like a deliberate betrayal. The next morning, I went back to the hospital. He looked pale but awake. I didn't bring up the messages right away. I just listened as he talked about the accident, feeling a brief flicker of the old connection we once had. But inside, something had shifted. That evening, I finally confronted him. I asked who L was. His expression changed. He didn't look shocked, only resigned. He claimed it wasn't what I thought, but I cut him off, asking him not to lie. After a pause, he admitted it had started months ago. He said he didn't mean for it to happen, but felt like we had become strangers. The words stung because I had felt the same way. Only instead of crossing that line, I had stayed, until Ryan. Later, I called Ryan and told him everything, the accident, the messages, the confrontation. I expected him to offer comfort or clarity, but instead, he hesitated and then said he had something to confess. He already knew about Mark. He had seen him with her once, and that was why he had come over that night. He didn't know how to tell me without hurting me. And suddenly, the story shifted again. I had thought I was standing at the edge of a mistake, but maybe I had been walking toward a truth that someone else had already uncovered. Some endings don't really feel like endings, they feel like the start of something completely different. After Ryan's confession, the silence between us felt heavier than anything that had happened before. It explained so much, yet it also opened a door to a new kind of pain. He had known about Mark's affair for a long time, had seen the cracks in my marriage long before I even noticed them. Instead of telling me right away, he stayed close, quietly watching it unfold. Maybe he thought he was protecting me, or maybe a part of him was waiting for the moment I would see him differently. Whatever his reason, he had carried the truth alone, and now we were both standing in the middle of a mess we hadn't asked for. That night, I didn't say much. I simply thanked him, ended the call, and sat in the quiet of my home. Every room now felt different, holding both memories of love and reminders of promises that had been broken. But I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. The next morning, I told Mark one needed space. My voice was calm, without tears or accusations. I simply said we had both been somewhere else for a long time, and maybe it was time to stop pretending we were still in the same place. He agreed without a fight. No drama, no last-minute attempts, just two people finally letting go. Over the following weeks, I started to rebuild. Not for Mark, and not for Ryan, but for myself. I needed to remember who I was outside of being a wife, a caregiver, or the person who always stayed no matter what. Ryan reached out again, this time with no pressure, no expectations. We met for coffee, talked like two people who simply enjoyed each other's company. He didn't ask for anything more, he just listened. And for now, that was enough. Maybe one day there could be more between us, maybe not. But I knew this was a better beginning than any picture-perfect ending I had imagined. Sometimes love doesn't show up the way you expect. Sometimes it breaks you apart just so you can find what's been missing, not in someone else, but in yourself. And if you're lucky, it gives you the strength to start again. Sometimes an ending is nothing more than the quiet beginning of something new. One married woman's peaceful evening changes in an instant when someone close to her husband reveals a hidden truth. What starts as harmless conversation slowly peels back layers of betrayal, unspoken desires, and emotional temptation, forcing her to confront not only her marriage but her own heart. With each revelation, the tension builds until nothing is as it first appeared. In the end, she must decide, cling to loyalty, or finally choose herself. Thank you for following this journey of love, betrayal, and self-discovery. Stories like this remind us that life isn't always as it seems, and every ending can lead to a new beginning. If you enjoyed this story and want to experience more captivating tales filled with twists, emotions, and lessons about the human heart, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us bring more unforgettable stories your way, so stay tuned, because there's so much more to come. Bye for now, and see you in our next video. Stay inspired, stay curious, and remember, every story has something to teach us.